Okay, well, today I made this, I typed or printed this talk after a time of getting it together. I printed it at twice the height I usually do it, so to make it big enough to read. So anyway, this one is called Be the Generous One While Doing Nothing. So if you have questions and you don't understand what I'm saying, please interrupt with a question. Okay. When you meet a circumstance that's unkind, hurtful, troubling, or destructive to your emotions, be the generous one. When you meet someone who expresses unhappiness or unreasonableness, or when you don't know what to do in a situation, when work seems tedious, too much, or a waste of time, be the generous one. If you want to like yourself, understand your life, and know your boundless big self, then be the generous one. Does that mean you always have to be the one without the needs or the unimportant one in the situation? No, it doesn't mean that, but you have to ask yourself always, what is really going on here? How can I help? Suppose you were a parent with unruly or troublesome children. Would you care whether your children ignored your emotional needs? You would be the emotional adult and behave as the adult. You wouldn't feel ignored. You would allow your children to be young, to be the green, unrealized buds without feeling resentment towards them. Your joy would be in your adulthood and the nurturing energy to love and protect them. The difference in your usual life is that everyone in the world is your child. It's the child of your body, speech, and mind, heart, all crafted by you as you are. But thinking about that, how do we develop the composure to meet confrontation intelligently? When it's a stranger, we can't really invoke familiarity as we could with our immediate family. So it's all up to us as we are. And since it does depend on us so much, how can we develop the composure we need? That's why we come to the Zendo once or twice a week and do nothing for 30 minutes. It sounds easy, but it's a monumental effort. We have to face all at once as we sit on the cushion without getting up and leaving. We have to face our negative thoughts, our aches and pains, our fears and wrong perceptions as we try every moment to stay in the present. Be the generous one means to see others from a protective stance. That is, how do we protect others from their own ignorance without harming their self-esteem? We take our adulthood for granted as being obvious, but to a more mature person, we might even seem immature or unaware as well. We also see that we move in a mature way sometimes, and sometimes we definitely don't. So be the generous one means to keep in mind that we change also as everybody does, and let compassion grow in our relationship with others. And that's how we become mature to take care of ourselves and others. Be the generous one does not mean to try to be the good, kind, or helpful person or someone who is eager to do the right thing. Such intentions only put us in a yes or no, up or down, success or failure, good or bad situation. Such motivations are the work and the impulses of self-nature. When we meet someone who is angry or troublesome, You have to remember that they are dressed in armor, with an army of reason standing nearby, ready with weapons of self-defense. If you engage them as they are, nothing can be accomplished. Both armies of warlike attitudes go down in defeat. But if you meet them with no armor and no weapons, there's nothing but space and plenty of good ground to put in the seeds of peacefulness, whether they are acknowledged at the time or not. If, on the other hand, you forget all this and behave in anger, indignation, or judgment, even though you are provoked, even when your acts appear to be very justified, you may end up deceiving yourself about the real state of affairs and also end up acting ignorantly. But Buddha nature is not deceived by the situation ever, and the fruit of a bad action arises in us, and baggage is accumulated and then has to be dealt with at some time later. And to become complete again, what we threw away in negativity in this time would have to be reintegrated in us. When you meditate in silence and composure and let negative thoughts appear without grasping them, however, you do assume responsibility for what arises in your mind and awaken your Buddha maturing adulthood. Therefore, then there's no blame, no excuse, no explanation, no, just a minute. No denial, and we remember our vow, all my ancient twisted karma from beginning is greed, hate, and delusion, born of body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow or confess. With exceptions, we have just acknowledgement, clear perception, and insight, and we begin to see clearly again. And you're free to nourish at that point what needs nourishing, to change what needs changing, to let go of what needs letting go, and to integrate what needs to return to its source, which is, in this case, us. And the practice always seems to go on and on. The precepts never seem to reach an aha moment of, now I can rest for a little while. Yet, in imperceptible ways, in spite of all this, you continue to mature in practice from being a very young, unrealized being to becoming an older, aware one, and then becoming a young adult, and then finally realizing yourself as a mature form of Bodhi being. For that moment when you look beyond self-nature, and Buddha nature was allowed by you to flow into all of your spaces, then you could give the best of yourself to someone who, however, often is ignorant of it and even receives it badly. But the seed, however, is planted, and many and may reap a good harvest in someone of emotional misery. You put a healthy seed in fertile ground, and your garden will eventually enrich others. All things are possible within you, but nothing is possible without practice and discipline of body, speech, and mind. Body and mind are a wondrous mix of growth, awakening, potential, and development. And every generous act you do is a nourishment of body and mind. With generosity, you center yourself with both of your spiritual feet on your own ground. Your ground is not a fortress impervious to influence. Your ground is not an unchangeable position you can rely on to always be the same. The ground you stand on is firmly in confidence, and it is a field of beyond form and emptiness. Be the generous one doesn't mean to have special qualities or to be special in any way. It just means that in a confrontation, you stand down and give the spaces needed for the flow of reality to move freely again. As you do in this endo, don't engage negativity. Don't engage negativity where you meet it. Give it the space to return to its own source. That way of taking care of someone is taking care of everyone. It's how to protect those who are vulnerable. It's the protective, nourishing love of a parent for everyone and everything in the spiritually young. And thank you. And do you have any questions? And here's Peter.
I arrive on the screen. Here we are. Good. That's good. That's right. Yeah, that's fine. A little closer. Oh, I see your seats in the way. Your things in the way. Put this up.
Okay.
All right, now get you inside here. All right.
Here we go.
Here we are. Yeah.
Here we are. Okay. Do you have any questions
Or comments?
or comments or like to add something to it? Mike?
I really liked your talk. It was so clear that I really don't have any questions on it. But it maybe came to mind that if we put our ego aside, then we can be generous and compassionate and understanding. We won't combat somebody, because the only time it seems that we get defensive or something like that is because our ego is being stepped on and stuff like that. And so I'm just thinking, is that along the lines of what you're saying, in the sense that we would be naturally compassionate if we have empathy toward the people that we think are confronting us and offending us. And that's about all I could say on that. I hope I understand you correctly.
You do. Is just, I would add one other thing. We recognize that everyone is not maturing at the same rate, and many times we're confronting a very young being, even though it looks like somebody in their 50s or 60s. We may be confronting someone who is actually very young in maturity, and so when we realize that, we take care of them because they are young, and because someone took care of us as we were young and helped us through our immature stages. So it's like we don't squash someone who is literally defenseless, even though it looks like they aren't.
Thank you.
I was thinking it would be a little bit like a chess game where you put the wrong thing in place. If you just remember to put the right piece there, everything falls in place. As long as you engage an army, you have to fight. So the thing is not to trigger the army to start working. Keep them in sleep mode.
Thank you.
John.
This talk is just so, well, probably apropos for many of us or all of us, but for me, I feel so apropos, especially because this is one of the most difficult things that I encounter in my practice is when confronted, just because of so many years of just being that person who immediately, goes into a super aggressive defensive mode. I won't hold back. That's my MO is, if you come at me with, a water gun, you're getting a tank back. So, it's, and it's hard. It's so hard for me to find space, if you know what I mean, like in those moments. And I feel like it's a lot of what I try and meditate on, is not meditate on per se, but what I'm not to say trying to gain from meditation, because that's not what I'm trying to do, but maybe what I'm I feel I'm achieving to some degree is the ability to find a pause, the ability to not throw my army at their army in that moment. Do you have any, suggestions or, any kind of, what can you do in those moments to try and, just ego is so strong in those moments. And at least for me, ego is so strong in those moments. And it's so difficult for me to, look at all those reasons and justifications I have and to turn them off. And I do like this. It's a bit of a strategy that you've given me to kind of look at this person as a child and to try and think of it in that way. And would I do this to a child?
John, it's not looking at a child as if they're a child. It's recognizing that they are, in spite of what appears to be the case. It's recognizing what the actual situation is rather than what the appearance is. Remember, in the Heart Sutra, we see everything in an inverted mood. When we're confused, we see things in an inverted way.
Yeah, it's just, it's a very difficult, I find this in practice as a whole, that practice in theory and in thought and in hindsight and in forethought is very easy. It's practice in those moments of each day when, the whirlwinds hit. That's when practice really needs to come into play, and when it is so difficult to do so for me, and I think for most people.
Yes, and that's the ones that cause us the most grief. So what you have to do is get your mind clear, and the way to do that is to remember to do nothing. Remember that nothing is really happening, even though it looks like everything is. And remember that your ego is actually not being engaged. In reality, you are fooling yourself to think that you are being engaged. You are literally stepping into the situation where you don't have to. If you can remember to stay where you are and do nothing and just receive it as a gift of Buddha, then you can do something with it in a very good way. You can enrich it, you can give it as a present later to someone else, you can bring it to bloom in yourself. There's nothing you can't do with it. And if you receive it, some part of you becomes whole again that you weren't even aware of was empty, was not complete. So recognizing that you're in a field far beyond form and emptiness, where nothing is what it seems to be. And that when people get lost in themselves, they are very young and immature inside. And you may be fighting a very young child, and never even be aware of it. So you could seriously harm that young child. If you can remember that, it would make you be very cautious.
Sandy?
Sandy? Yeah.
In response to John, a while back, I can't remember, I read a book by Emma Chodron. And in that book, she kind of teaches you how to be aware of when those moments start, be it anger, despair, whatever. But she stresses that awareness, that coming into the present moment is the way to the kind of way to go forward, because if you don't, you're caught in it. And what takes over is delusion, in a sense. It's not real when those types of feelings, negative feelings. And I learned slowly over time, I noticed that I would be walking in maybe going into a meeting or something, and it would strike me that I'm having these negative thoughts. I'm angry, or I'm this, or I'm that. And when I learned to become aware of them, I found I could let them go and refocus on the now and be in it. But Jane, when I first came to the Zendo, I was kind of thrown in a chair, and there I sat. And Peter had said, "You're not aiming for anything. You're just there to sit, and you're just there, to basically study yourself." And somewhere over the time, maybe a year or so in, Jane, you mentioned to me that you felt I was a compassionate person. And in the past, I had never considered myself a compassionate person. Matter of fact, if anything, I thought myself to be more self-centered than anything. But I noticed over the years, and it's been a lot of years now, I find myself thinking more about other first rather than myself. It's as though I've stepped away and from my past behavior and my past way of looking at things. And I find now that I have my moments, but I found now that I can focus more quickly into the reality of the present moment and judge more so how I should react and what would be the best way. And I'm cognizant of not wanting to hurt someone's feelings and to be protective in that sense, because I know if I had been confronted years ago with my behavior or something negative I was doing, I would have been very insulted. So I feel that you really have to be cognizant of others first, because what we have is very powerful. Our ability to hurt others is a powerful thing. And we have to be aware of the other person and treat them as though they're kind of like a glass ball, that they're very fragile, and just the wrong word can hurt somebody for a long, long time. So that's my two bits.
That's a good point. Actually, that's a very good thing for everyone to remember, is that the more you practice, the more lethal you can become to others. But that lethal quality is that your ability to step over something is not everyone's ability. And they may drown in the puddle that you step over. So you have to be really careful of dealing with people, especially when you don't understand their real age and you fight them like an adult. You may be fighting a child holding up a big sword and be fooled by the sword, only to find that you flick them over like a dust storm. So you have to be really careful, and that's a good point. Rachel.
Thanks, Jane.
Sometimes.
Dealing with adults in unpredictable circumstances, it really can be surprising and painful that everyone is always changing, and someone who perhaps in many circumstances is very much a mature person, in another circumstance is a child. And I mean, I don't mean just through illness, but just circumstances. And I find it especially poignant and painful when on the surface, someone, me or someone else, can do and say what is the right thing. Everyone will vote and say that was a good thing to say or do. And yet it wasn't the generous thing to say or do. And the more temperate action might have been to not do or say anything, even though that may mean witnessing someone else, it ending in tears in a sense, you know, where there really is a consequence. And it's so much more complex than one simple action. And when you're dealing with a moving being and a moving feeling situation, um, to learn saying the right thing isn't the right thing. It really does take a kind of hidden maturity, and I think a lot of practice, because it's then the ego gets involved, or at least mine does, which is, hey, I did and said the right thing, right? You're not supposed to go screw up now. You're supposed to say thank you. And not only does that not happen, but anyway, you just realize it in retrospect, but it's just a series of lessons. And I like when you said how did you say it, Jane? The precepts never end. You never have an aha moment where you say, now I can rest.
Now I can rest. That's right. Actually, I was just thinking, if you want to know what the age of the person you're dealing with is, I think it's fairly simple. If you're alert, you'll recognize if you're dealing with an adult or even a partial adult, their moves will be to dismiss the army and to step forward and make amends in some way. Then you know you're dealing with someone who's partially adult. But if you're dealing with a child, they will send the army in first thing. And then you really have to be on your toes. So that's how you tell. And I wrote something for this talk, and then when I went to find it, to read it, it was disappeared and I couldn't find it. Somehow I had disappeared it even while I was typing it. And so I thought, well, maybe that didn't want to be in this talk, and so I left it out. I didn't go back and redo it. Actually, I did twice, but both times it disappeared. But I think now I'll say a little bit about what it was, because I think it's partially connected to this talk. That if you want to know how to deal with such a difficult situation, like being with someone who's always calling up the army, it's the best thing is to go to the Zendo as often as you can and sit those 30 or 40 minutes in silence, letting everything hit you like arrows when you're sitting, because you're not trying to escape any of them. That's the emotions, the aches and pains, and all the fears that are hiding inside. And just let them all pierce you while you're sitting, and let it happen over and over again. There's no aha moment in this either, but there is a time when you're sitting and you're not trying to make something happen. You're just sitting there and something blooms suddenly inside, in silence. It opens up and it's very beautiful, and everything about it calms your whole being and sets you down quietly. And when it blooms, it's the beginning of your adulthood expressing itself, even if it's only for a moment. But you have an understanding of what it is and how you can see things more clearly because of it. When you look at the world through this kind of beautiful silence, and it's something that's in you that's unfolding, it's not outside you. And you look at the world, you see clearly that most of what you think is true about the world is just your illusions or your made up stories. And so you start just facing things more out of curiosity than you did out of trying to get something. And when that happens, the next time you are met with an army of someone, you instantly recognize this is a child and I can help this person, because I am the adult here, therefore I can help them. And you do it by doing nothing. You just receive it and thank Buddha for this gift and wait to do something with it. It's like some precious fertilizer or something for your plant you didn't realize you needed. But anyway, you express gratitude for it rather than anger, and you know that somewhere inside it will bloom in a different way. But you've had a taste of what it feels like to have something open in you, and that is your maturity starting to really open. So anyway, that's as much as I got from what was written before before I clicked it and vanished it twice. Okay, that's all then.
Looks like it's time for service. This is another
Okay.
questions or comments?
Did you want to say anything?
No.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for your questions.